Well done. All right, we know that we're in the anchor position almost. We got one more panel after this. I've told them we're going to be brief, be bright, and be gone. How's that? And we will be riveting, right? Okay, so yeah. Woo. So panel, come on and join me. Please, we have some outstanding folks with us today. And so I have Phil Nevels, Director at Exelon. Felicia Etheridge of CPS Energy, she's a CCEO there. And then we have Paul Lau of SMUD, Operations Officer. And joining us today, we have John Niesner, who is the Regional VP for Itron. Let's give them all a welcome. All right, the water right there. So we're talking about the role of the utility in the future city. And this is really, I was very excited to moderate this panel because, this is such a point of speculation. What does it look like? What is the business model for that utility? And I started thinking about what would that future look like? So I'm going to take you on a little imaginary journey. It'll be short, so hang with me. So imagine a future where distributed energy resources are now competitive to traditional sources in price and performance. Energy storage is well priced and technological issues are resolved. The customers have adopted EVs, solar power, smart appliances, and many more technologies, and they have obtained a critical mass in the marketplace. So now imagine you're a utility executive. How do you respond to the decline of traditional energy consumption and the challenge to long-standing business models that are driven by the proliferation of DERs, the distributed energy resources? How do you retain and grow that customer base that you've had and maybe in some cases taken for granted in prior years with ever-encroaching competition? And frankly, what responsibility do you have as a utility to bring the broader critical infrastructure organizations together to foster alignment and connectedness? And finally, how do you continue to reliably and cost-effectively deliver energy to end users from utility-scale systems while simultaneously making needed investments to maintain relevance? And should you? Can y'all answer those questions? We're going to see if these folks can. For them, this is not imaginary. This is their reality. So we have with us 3 utility executives and one company, Itron, that serves utilities. So we have some great perspectives to kind of unpack today. So we're going to start philosophically. So giving us a 1,000-foot view, what is your institution thinking about the role of the utility in 2030 and beyond? You want to kick us off, Phil?
Sure. And just by way of introduction, my name is Phil Nevels, Director of Innovation and Partnerships for Exelon Utilities. A lot of folks aren't aware, Exelon Utilities sort of sits on top of the 6 utilities that are in the Exelon fleet. ComEd in Chicago being the largest, but also Philly, Baltimore, DC, Atlantic City, and Delmarva as well. So we've got a few utilities.
Yes.
And in terms of, you hear this term platform thrown out a lot, and nobody really knows exactly what the platform is. It isn't a single platform, but we think about platform in terms of, we call it 4 layers, right? So there's an infrastructure layer, there's a system planning layer, there's a transactive layer, then there's a customer layer. And so when we talk about platform, it's about what investments will the utility make to enable all those different layers. That all starts with the customer experience at the very top. And so as what our team is working on right now is defining what the customer experience of the future needs to be. And then from that, deriving all of those investments that are required at each of those different layers of the business to enable that customer experience. I think when you talk about the utility of the future, a lot of folks maybe assume that the utility is moving into all brand new products and services. And that is certainly something that we and other utilities, I think, are exploring. But we also think that there is opportunity for our traditional model being applied to new types of investments to enable new types of experiences. So the furthest extension of that, I'm maybe not being brief, but the furthest extension of that is what we call the connected community, what many people call the smart city. And as you think about use cases within that context, we're trying to answer the question, what investments can we make in utility infrastructure and maybe non-utility infrastructure to support some of those experiences in the smart city? I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Felicia, you want to talk about what CPS is thinking?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about that. It's a gnarly question. I mean, if you've been here the last 2 days, you know that everything has been talked about. The utility has a role in enabling and supporting and even thinking about the future. If I had the answer to what the world looks like in 2030, as Paula said yesterday, I wouldn't be sitting here. I would have bought a lottery ticket and gone somewhere. But it is important for us to think about this and really struggle, if I use that word, to answer the question. The one thing we do know is we can't stand still. Standing still is not an option. We have to change, we have to adapt, and we are making decisions today for the future based on the best information we have today. That's why meetings like this are so important. Networking with industry experts outside our industry is so important. But we do know, just as you said, it all starts with the customer. We have to have the customer first and forefront at everything we do, because if we don't serve them, then we really become irrelevant.
Okay, so for SMUD, I think for those of you who's not familiar with SMUD, we're Sacramento Municipal Utility District. You know, we serve the capital of California in Sacramento, so about 900 square miles, and we're a public-owned utility, kind of just like CPS, except we're not affiliated with the city. So our board, we have 7 board members who are elected, and they represent about the 1.5 million customers in Sacramento, about 630,000 accounts. So for us, our board has always been very, very focused on the customer. In fact, it's very interesting, you know, at the conference today to talk about, you know, customer-centric or, you know, human design. So we've been actually talking about for the last 10 years, 15 years. And so one thing that's very interesting for SMUD, everything that we do is all about the customers. So our board is, you know, we have a major directive that everything that we do is supposed to actually help to improve the quality of life and economic vitality of the community that we serve in. Now, obviously, we've got to serve safe and reliable power at affordable price, but also, being California, I don't think I need to tell the group, we're probably the leading edge or the bleeding edge, you know, of the transition to a low-carbon future. So SMUD, we really felt that the utility absolutely needs to play a critical role for this transition. So we have just adopted, you talk about transformation, we have just adopted probably one of the most aggressive IRPs, integrated resource planning, I think in the US, so at least for utility our size. So we're gonna go net carbon zero by 2040. So our board has just committed about $7 billion in the next 20 years to get to there. So to answer your question, so one of the biggest fear that this utility executive has is not to strand your investments. So you hear Kimberly talked about, you know, has DES come, right? Has the electric vehicle be here? Is the battery cost cheap enough? Right? Is solar on the rooftop cheap enough? Certainly in California, by 2020, all new homes is going to be required to put a solar on the roofs. So we have one of probably the most aggressive energy efficiencies in the nation. So we're mandated to reduce 1% per year through energy efficiency. SMUD has been doing that about 2%, being aggressive, because as we said, every dollar saved is come back, you know, to the community itself. So we have been very, very aggressive in terms of looking at what the new business model look like. I absolutely agree, Neil, that some customer who love technology will adopt the new technology when it becomes economically viable or for emotional connection reasons. You also have a huge segment that can't afford it. And then you also have a segment, the disadvantaged communities. You know, you talked about inclusive, right? Bringing this inclusive, you know, making sure there's no digital divide, you know, to this new economy. SMUD, being a local, you know, basically locally owned business, feels like we absolutely got to create new business model with new product and services, such like we're looking at right now, how do you develop public-private partnerships, you know, in terms of creating new services that the customer would pay for, in addition to making sure that there's no cross-subsidies that's kind of happening and making sure the low-income folks are not actually being left behind. So that's our job as utility executive, is making sure, number one, we hear what the communities, different segment of community, what they want and what their needs are. How do you align our investments our current investment that we have and the investment that we have in the past, how do you optimize that along with what the customer is actually investing? Because think about when you talk about all these new technology advancements, the only companies, at least one of the only companies that has a complete look on the value chain from things beyond the meters, when you talk about electric vehicles, when you talk about demand response, energy efficiency, the impact that it has on the distribution system and the transmission system and the power marketplace. The utilities is probably one of the most logical entities that can put them all together and try to get value out of all those and be that smart, I'm going to call it orchestra, or the kind of the maestro to say, how do you actually making sure all those things are moving right in a way that is actually aligned? So for us, I know that's kind of a long answer, but for us, we have been working very, very closely, with the universities, the local universities, and then from a job workforce development perspective. We are also working very closely, with the legislature and the regulatory agencies like the Air Resources Board, the Air Quality District. Because in order for us to achieve what we need to achieve to a low carbon future, all those key stakeholders have to play a key role. And the utility, at least for SMUD, and our board, sees the utilities plays a major pivotal role for this smart transition.
Thank you. So John, as an organization, Itron, that's serving these customers, what are y'all thinking?
Well, it's a challenge because it's an evolution that we're in. We're way beyond just having a meter that can automate the meter read for accurate billing and stuff like that. There's new pressures, that are brought up on companies like Itron. And those pressures are, they stem beyond just the utility. Everybody here just kind of talked about them. And so, companies like us, and there's others out there, we're not the only one by any way, shape, or form, but, we're having to address these new challenges in new creative ways that allow us to be more open-minded, more adoptive of open standards, where we're not pigeonholing any of the customers that are out there adopting this technology, where they can be supportive to what the general public wants from a smart city standpoint. Another piece to add into that is you've heard the term ecosystems. People don't realize that that's something kind of newer to the utility world of having entities, IoT-type devices, be able to utilize the network that the utilities already have in place, the canopies that are out there, and bringing more resources, more connected communities to leverage that. It's very important because if we, Itron, took it upon ourselves to be everything for everybody, we would fail ourselves and we would fail our customers. So we have to kind of adopt and adapt to be able to work with multiple third parties that are able to come in there.
Thank you. Well, let's drill down a little bit more on some of these specific things that you're doing. And so I'd like to hear a little bit about where you have chosen to place priority in terms of the distributed energy resources and preparing for the proliferation of those that you own and those that you do not control. So let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so most of our utilities are unable to own generation. All of our utilities are in deregulated markets, so none of them are vertically integrated. So that's an important note. So they're all poles and wires. And so we're not able necessarily to able to put solar on top of the rooftops and own that as a regulatory asset at all. But we are looking at things such as community solar and how do we support that. So if you look at cities like Chicago, actually 2/3 of the homes aren't able to have rooftop solar. And so there are certain places where community solar is likely going to be the option for those folks that want to access renewable power in that way. We see ourselves as having an opportunity to provide that for customers. We also, when we think about whether we control these distributed resources or not, there is some level of coordination that needs to happen between all these resources. If you get into areas such as peer-to-peer trading, you start to talk about transactive energy and all these different things that no one really has a definition for. When you get there, there's a coordination that needs to happen between what the resources are doing and the safety and reliability of the system. And so many of the projects that we're exploring is at that point of intersection between the system and then what customers want to do with their rooftop PV systems, and how do we coordinate those different things. And so I think there's another question that gets more specific about projects, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But that's where a lot of our focus is right now.
So, sure, Alicia, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I would say that we spend a lot of time talking and listening to our customers, to our key stakeholders, and focusing on what they tell us they expect and deserve from us. In particular, like you mentioned around solar, various solar offerings, whether it be rooftop, whether it be community. Unlike your company, we own the whole value chain. And so we've elected first to focus on customers, much like you talked about, Paul, and then really understand what they expect from us, what our community expects, whether it be solar, whether it be a project with battery storage, working with our universities like you talked about, and honing in on those particular projects around generation, as well as ensuring we are looking at the affordability issue. Being a utility, we have to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy for all customers, not just certain customers, but for all customers. And so that really is a challenge sometimes to really find that sweet spot where you can deliver those products and services and just basic enabling technologies, for lack of a better term, that customers really want. We've been focused on a direction inside our company called FlexPath, and that really is setting us up to be able to take on any new enabling technology that emerges, whether it be battery storage, whether it be something that somebody in this room is ultimately going to come up with, as I was listening today, or something some third grader is going to come up with in the next few years. Being able to serve and deliver services to customers, we know we have to be ready. We also know we can't do it by ourselves. So partnerships are incredibly important for us. That definitely is going to change, or is changing, the business model for us, like you talked about. How do we make sure that we're in a position to always enable and support what our community needs and expects and deserves from us?
So for SMUD, this has been a very long journey for us in terms of creating a smart city. Back in 2009, SMUD we're very fortunate. We won a $308 million grant from DOE, something that we call Smart Sacramento. It's really to start laying down foundations and said, what are the technology infrastructure that you need to actually move to this decarbonized future? So we have full AMR, smart meter deployment back in 2009. So, and then now we're actually moving on to the next generation. We have developed strategic partnerships, with OSI to actually put in an advanced distribution management system. And then we're also working with them to develop what we call DERMS, Distribution Energy Resource Management System. So that, one of the things that I don't think, for those who doesn't work in utilities, doesn't know the transmission side is balanced every 4 seconds. Before the day of the smart meters, we don't even know you have an outage or not unless somebody calls. So there's a huge gap between, what is what we call a connected city and really what the electric infrastructure is, especially on the distribution side. So we have spent a tremendous amount of money in terms of investing in our facilities, right, in the distribution side, to make sure that we have visibility and controllabilities, to get ready for the thousands of those things that either we own or we don't, or the customer owns. How do you actually optimize making sure that the grid is still safe, is still reliable, and is still affordable? So we have been working extensively with the low-income areas in terms of the whole, the bill burden. We have totally restructured our low-income subsidies to making sure that people are paying their share, but really an affordable share for the low-income area. So that's from a technology standpoint, we're putting all the foundational pieces that we know. But like CPS, we're also vertically integrated. So we're in California. So for SMUD, we run our own balancing authority. So we actually arbitrage what we call California Independent System Operators and the Northwest. So right now, SMUD is going to join the energy imbalance market in April. And there's a lot of talk in California right now about an enhanced day-ahead market. So on one end, we're looking at, from an operation perspective, how do you get operation excellence? How do you optimize what you have now and what the future is kind of coming on the marketplace to make sure that you have money for the future investments? The other piece that we're also doing is we're on the customer side. So you heard what I talked about that by 2020, all new rooftop is going to require solar. So for those of you, maybe a lot of utilities in the U.S., our load is both our load and the demand is less what it was 10 years ago. So we've been actually focusing in terms of, well, if customers are allowed to put solar in, what is an option that you're going to want to offer them? So we pioneered, I think we were the first utility in the U.S. to pioneer community solar. We did that 14 years ago. A 1 megawatt solar turkey farm that we put a 1 megawatt on that we sold our customer like a virtual solar. Last year, we sold 130 megawatts of commercial solar shares. So this is actually having a program that commercial customers can buy into a grid-connected solar, community solar, and it acts just like they have solar on the roof to meet their sustainability. And right now, we're working with the CEC to give developers a choice, new developers a choice next year. Say, instead of mandatory putting a rooftop solar on your roof, we can offer you a product that is offer community solar that acts just like the solar on your roof. So we're actually looking at ways to do that. I know this is a long answer, but Kim, I want to make sure everybody got the full breath. And then from a priority-wise, in terms of DERs, we're really focusing on building electrification and transportation electrification. But so if you think about from a carbon perspective, the utility is only 30%. Transportation is the other 30%. And since if you think about, if we're not careful about the growth of EVs, so we have about 10,000 EVs right now in Sacramento. It's going to double by 2020. It's going to be 5 times that by 2025. So just for perspective, it's going to go from 10,000 today to 20,000 to 50,000 to 750,000 in the span of 15 years. So if we're not careful about smart charging, about working with the cities to making sure that the shared mobility is how it's going to change the world in terms of how city planning is, we want to make sure SMUD is right in the center of this discussion to making sure that how shared mobility and all this charging infrastructure that you're going to need is going to be optimized, because otherwise the investment in the grid to support all these millions of new cars, California have a mandate, executive order. By 2030, there's going to be 5 million electric cars in California. And by 2030, 60% of California power portfolio is going to come from renewables. So we have huge mandates that is actually driving the utility investments. So we want to make sure that we actually have a chance to drive and influence those legislation and those regulatory pieces to making sure we do that. And then one of the big things, you talk a lot, you hear the utilities about new business models and really need to start developing new strategic partnerships. First time ever, SMUD, we actually have a strict directive to talk about developing new revenues. So we have struck international partnerships, strategic partnership like with NEC, right, with OSI, to develop the next generation so we can start capitalizing on intellectual property. So we can think about new revenue models that didn't exist today because of the fact that, we think kilowatt hours as your only commodity product is probably not going to survive by the time you get to 2030 or 2040. Right. So we're doing a lot, so I'm glad I come to conferences like this to actually pick everyone's brain and steal any good ideas I can find, because certainly the challenges in front for almost all utilities in the U.S.
Can I touch on something that Paul said? You mentioned it's 4 seconds to balance the grid, right? That's all you have. Probably by 2030, 4 seconds will seem like a lifetime.
Yes.
So it's going to have to be much faster, and that brings its own set of challenges with it, right? It's nanoseconds.
Yeah.
Right.
So since you touched on that, so that is one area that we really felt like that there's going to be a lot of research,
yeah,
and a lot of partnership that we have to develop,
yeah,
because of the fact that the new batteries coming on, right, using battery ancillary services, and how much battery do you need, right? In California we have something called the famous duck curve. I think most of you guys heard, because of the rapid development of solar. So we're actually paying Arizona and Nevada to take our renewable energy, which from a financial perspective makes no sense at all, but it meets a state mandate that you actually have. So we're actually looking at what is the best way for us to optimize that.
So John, I'm going to have you, we're going to bring the next question and this question that I had just asked together so that you can share with us how you are helping your utility clients prepare for the additional load that the DERs that they don't control brings to them, but also the specific sort of technologies and projects that maybe you're working on with some of your clients.
Sure. So a couple of things. There was a lot that was said between the three over here. Great stuff. You know, the traditional utility looks at things more from their own operations, and that's keeping the reliable service at a high level and issuing, you know, reliable bills to the customers at the lowest cost possible. And so from a pure operation standpoint, you know, a lot of people have developed networks and canopies over their stuff to help minimize their costs and how they go about doing their business and increasing the output capabilities. As we said earlier, you know, the fact that they have these pieces in place, there's additional capacities within these networks where they could bring in their customers to be more of a part. Instead of just a deliverable company, now they can become somewhat of a conduit for greater things than just the goods that they deliver, just the core goods like kilowatt hours, for your example. And so a lot of the stuff that we are doing are helping them to understand as IoT devices, Internet of Things, you know, are being brought into the networks that originally were designed more from an operational standpoint. How is it going to affect it, if it does? And what is the expandability beyond it, and the growth opportunities that it can afford? Because you know, there are you know, the whole concept here about, you know, city of the future, smart cities, those things. There's a lot of things that are going to happen in the future that we're not aware of today, but they each have an issue that will bring some, I'll say, responsibility on the utility side. For example, on the EVs, if you have, let's just say, an older area that is going through regeneration and people are tearing down homes, building newer homes, buying a couple of Teslas or EVs, putting them in there, you know, there's a good chance that the actual grid that was originally built into that area was not designed to be sustainable. So what a lot of folks don't understand is the importance of the utilities to be able to make sure that they have an environment that is conducive and welcoming to things such, this is just one example, but things like EVs into that area, but that they're able to help maybe kind of control how the load is worked throughout the day or throughout the night so that they don't have to come in there, rip and replace the whole distribution system, which is, you know, a significant amount of capital. So some of the stuff that we're trying to do is help bring visibility and insight and the ability to be supportive for those adopters that are coming in to become part of their system that they have and the ecosystem that they build.
No, that's good. So it leads me to feel like, since I wanted to ask you, so let's get into some of those specific projects that you guys are looking at to prepare your utility for the future, but also, I mean, in a way, it's a tale of two utilities at the same time, right? You've got to be that risk-adverse traditional utility, but oh so much more nimble and
Right.
ready to go. And I think that's where maybe you're headed. So let's talk about some of those projects that address that.
Yeah, it's hard being on the innovation team at a utility. It can be
It's oxymoronic.
Yeah.
Yes, I get it.
Oxymoron.
So we point a lot to the example in Chicago, which is our ComEd territory, where we have an area that's called the Community of the Future, and maybe some folks have heard of this, but we've started to explore what this intersection between the utility and the City of the Future is. And there's a lot of things we're doing there related to EVs and distributed lighting and all these different things. But maybe the most interesting piece of that is a microgrid that we're building within that community. What's even more interesting than that is that we're pairing it with an existing microgrid on the Illinois Institute of Technology's campus. And so we've created a controller that allows these two microgrids to talk to one another. This gets back to my earlier point about how can you actually optimize how these different microgrids interact with one another. And you sort of imagine a future in these smart cities where you have more microgrids, especially oriented around critical city services and things like that. So that is one big thing we're doing. Additionally, when you think about, you call them non-wires alternatives, where you leverage DER in such a way that you can minimize the amount of investment you need to make into the grid. With that, we're exploring how can we do that and layer on peer-to-peer transactions in such a way as to optimize the flow of power in a particular area to help alleviate the need for new construction of lines. In addition to that, and very similar, is about how do we leverage grid storage to do something like that. So storage is one of those things that you can use for a lot of different purposes. One thing you can use it for is peak shaving. And basically what that means is you require less power coming from some central generator because you're getting it from the battery. If we're able to do that and use the battery for those purposes, can we leverage the remaining capacity in the battery for other purposes like peer-to-peer and some of these other transactions? So many of the projects we're working on are kind of these optimization coordination problems,
Right.
and how can the utility have a role in providing that within the system?
Really interesting, the pairing of the microgrids. That's fascinating. So, we're interest of time, I really want to ask this question. I want to make sure we don't miss. What has to change in this industry for that future that you envision to occur? Felicia, you want to try?
Start with me
Oh,
on that.
yeah.
Okay.
Of course, you know where I office, so this may not
yeah.
be good.
So, my man is.
It's a list.
It's a list. I'm trying to which one's politically correct to say with the crowd.
Oh, no, come on, come on.
No. So first, what's really got to change for us is in the utility space is speed, right? We have to be faster and faster, but pragmatically faster. We can't be fast just to be fast. We don't have the luxury necessarily to fail and fail fast and fail often. There are too many things depending on us as a utility. So we have to be better about how we approach innovation, to your point, and that is a tough job in a utility. But yes, that's one of the things. We have to also think differently. We have to collectively, as an organization, do a cultural mind shift to think differently about the future and how that looks, and understand that you have to extend the category that we're in. It's not just about kilowatt hours. It's not just about the next greatest microgrid. It's about collectively and holistically all of those things that you mentioned, right? You have to look at it all as one seamless orchestration if you want to talk about it that way. We also have to talk about differently for us, and probably for most other utilities, other than those that are in retail, is how do you change the regulatory model that allows you to be a little more flexible, a little more agile. Having worked in California and worked in Texas, there are lots of differences, but there are a lot of similarities. And so that whole regulatory model has to change. It can't be just recovery and value every investment, even though it is our customers' money. You do have to have the opportunity to innovate and test. And I'll stop there because I could go on.
Could go on. Paul, you want to take that?
So for SMART, I think the biggest thing for us is to make sure that we understand that we're part of the community itself. So instead of looking SMART as being a silo that we just provide reliable electric service, is really about what can SMART do to become a benefit for all the other all the stakeholders, like the cities, the universities, right, the NGOs, right, the business community. How do you actually make yourself part of that solution and be open for business opportunities? So I love what you said about risk, right? Utilities, we're not risk takers, right? Because the light goes out, you go all over the front page, especially at the state capitol. But really about, being open to say, how do you actually manage those risks? When you talk about fail quick and fail fast, that's easily said. But that's very, very hard to do, especially from a utility mindset. So I think the utility have to go through a paradigm shift to say what we're good at, what we're not good at, what do we need to bring in, people who is really good at managing risk and those things, but then really about look at innovation differently. So I do want to touch on one area. So like, for example, we actually have told the city and everybody that we want to go back to the future. All new homes be all electric, like in the 80s. So we actually have incentivized, and we actually have two, builders that their home is going to be all electric with induction cooking and the whole thing. We also said, hey, you know what? To improve Sacramento, you need to improve the competitiveness of Sacramento. So we're learning from Austin and from San Antonio. So we're in the process right now of putting the California Mobility Center. It's a public-private partnership to say, if we are really seriously going to move 5 million electric vehicles in California, what are the things that you need to do from a policy, regulation, business model, charging infrastructures, the IoT, the connected, even about what about the infrastructure itself? Think about the connectivity that you need, right? Schutz might get into the fiber business. Certainly we can do that, like some other people has, but is it the right thing for us to do? So we are actually opening all those new business opportunities that in the past, that SMUD would say, this is not our core competency, so we're not going to touch it at all. So we are really looking at, and we have got, we actually always had consultants and actually new staff on board, and then we're educating our board to say, what is the right amount of risk that you need to take? Because resistance is futile.
Oh, a Borg reference.
Because whether you like it or not, our core, kilowatt hours, unless we can grow building and EVs, right? Those days are gone. So just because you're in a monopoly, with a stroke of a pen, that could change tomorrow in California. So you got to get yourself and run it like a business and prepare for that change. So I think that's probably the hardest thing for utilities executive for the mindset is get rid of the silo, make yourself part of the community solution, and take risks together along with the community that you're actually obligated to serve.
Outstanding. So John, sort of from that outside perspective, what has to change in the industry?
I think it is changing. So what I'm about to say, I'm saying it on the standpoint that it's not happening, but it's to what he was just saying, that the utilities, and we've referenced the electric side of the utility, but we can't forget there's also the gas side and the water side. And all three different types have these additional pressures being brought up on them to do a better job, to provide better service, to keep their rates down low, but also to start to be able to offer additional services or more information about the services that they're offering. So I would say the continuation of being receptive of these pressures that are coming in from the marketplace. And then, and these guys up here do a good job of, on companies like ours, of coming to us and very candidly and openly talking about that. I think that transparency helps companies like ours understand where we need to be investing our R&D dollars, and so that we are focused. So it's more of we're bringing to market what these guys are needing based upon the pressures put upon them by their customers, versus having a big miss when we come to market with some kind of device that's just really no good for what they truly need. So the communication and the transparency, and again, I stress that is happening. I'm not saying it's not happening. That's a big piece of it.
Thank you. So we are down to our speed round. Okay, so for our final question today is, let's talk about, you've talked about customers, but let's talk about the other side, because that's human capital. They're valuable to you. But the other side, the other part of human capital, the people who work for your organization, what has to change and what will change, do you think, in that human capital mix in the future?
And I think the point was brought up earlier. Culturally, we need to become risk takers as utilities, and you need people who are willing to embrace that and fail fast, as we said earlier.
That's good.
I think we have to make sure that our folks are properly trained for the future, that we're preparing them for the future, that they understand that it isn't your grandfather's utility any longer. And to the extent that positions and job responsibilities really do change and are replaced with robots or whatever bot or doodah that comes along out there, that we reserve the human aspect for the really important, high-touch pieces of our business for our customers. But retraining and making sure we don't leave anybody behind is really important in this industry.
Excellent. Well,
Yeah, so for us, it's really about, telling the story, right? Telling our employees why is it important for them to change, right? How do you actually build a sense of urgency that, if you're not careful, the future will arrive before you know it, and there'll be no time to change. But at the same time, also acknowledge change is hard, right? For a company that's still a monopoly, that our rates is 30% cheaper than PG&E, and we're always top rated in J.D. Powers. So this need for change and making sure that they can see the path forward. If their job is going to be, basically impacted, like for example, we have no more wall maps, actually our DSO. Our DSO is totally run computerized. And so that change management that you need as new technologies being deployed or new business models being deployed, you have to spend the time to engage your employees and bring them along. And you have to emotionally connect with those employees to make sure they understand that they serve a bigger cause than just, pushing a little button that they're doing. So for us, we have worked on really changing the whole culture for SMUD for the last 5 years. And we brought in, folks to help us, external folks. Change management is not it's not something that the utilities readily talk about. But we are embracing it. We're embracing those change.
it's good. John, the final word on human capital for your perspective.
She said it earlier about it's not your grandfather's utility anymore, and so it's not. Because of just human expectations have risen so much over the last decade and a half or whatever. The ability to be receptive of risk. I firmly feel that they should be rewarded for taking those risks when they're successful with that. So it's just the changing of the mind and how, versus how it's historically been done versus how it will be done in the future.
Awesome. I think they rocked it. What do you think? Let's give them a hand. Thank you. And thank you all.